course on the history of the Inquisitions is probably one of the most difficult courses I've ever had to put together. Not so much because of the research. The research, although some of it is, as you'll see, very controversial, the research was fairly straightforward when it comes to the history of the Inquisitions. The problem was in the presentation of a subject like the Inquisitions. I could have been incessantly critical of this topic, of the Inquisition, and presented it in such a light, but I think that 6 weeks of sanctimonious condemnation would have gotten a little bit wearisome for you. I realized that the difficulty, the problem with the Inquisition was in the aim of the course. What were we going to do with a topic like the Inquisition? How was it to be presented? Could there be another way of presenting the Inquisition other than condemning it? It was, after all, as one English cleric put it, a thing burdensome to the world. Well, the problem boiled down to this. We could approach the Inquisition of one of 3 ways. We could judge the Inquisition, explain it, or understand it. Now, to judge the Inquisition is the easiest of all. It would involve merely looking at another society, and as many people do, judge other societies of the past against our own standards. This is typically done with such topics as slavery, racism, the rights of women, freedom of speech. It's a common approach in historical writing, unfortunately, but it's a very sterile approach. It does allow us to revel in a certain smug self-assessment of our own superiority, and we can do a great deal of sanctimonious grandstanding. And with regard to something like the Inquisition, to condemn medieval Roman Catholic intolerance, bigotry, hatred, racism, sadism would be extremely easy, but it would get us nowhere intellectually. Now, it's a little bit harder to judge a society in the past according to that society's own standards. That would demand that we discover what those standards were in the past and see if those people acted to or against their own ideals, whether they acted true or falsely to their own values. But even more difficult than judgment of any type is in explaining something like the Inquisition. To explain something like the Inquisition, we have to understand the context in which it was born and rose and lived. It is a dangerous byproduct of studying history in isolating a particular phenomenon, in removing an institution from its historical context. And unfortunately, again, this is all too common in historical studies. An historian takes an event, a person, a work of art, an institution, a movement, and looks at it as if it were floating around in space, unattached to any historical epoch, unaffected by developments around it, unperturbed by any social upheavals. And the Inquisition is almost always studied in isolation, untied to the trends around it. And that's fairly amazing considering what was going on during the heyday of the Inquisition. And that is the decline of feudalism, the rise of cities and capitalism, the stirrings of monarchical absolutism, the beginnings of European nationalism. Now, how is it that historians habitually ignore all of these developments contemporary with the Inquisition as if they had no effect on the thinking and the ideas of the men who operated and encouraged the Inquisitions? I maintain that the Inquisition is explainable only in the context of these other developments. The most difficult thing to do, however, is to understand the Inquisition. And to understand does not mean just to know how the Inquisition came about. It does not mean to know the historical procedures in the Inquisition. That's not understanding. That's just knowing what passes as the facts of the Inquisition. To understand the Inquisition, we have to appreciate how the Inquisition was actually consistent with a medieval world view. We said that to explain something means to see the connections between one thing, the Inquisition, and those things surrounding it. Economic developments, politics, religion. That is simply the context. And in this class, the only thing we're going to do in this first lecture is to set the context for the birth of the Inquisition. But to understand the Inquisition means moving beyond explaining. It means to comprehend the motive and attitudes of someone or some development without being in agreement. Now listen to that. To understand, to comprehend the motives of someone without being in agreement. And that is a lost art. Because when we disagree with somebody, our impulse is to condemn that person. And that just brings us right back to judging the Inquisition. And that, again, is the sterile approach which will get us nowhere. Now, we may disagree with the thinking that brought about and sustained the Inquisition, but we have no right to expect that medieval men and women should have acted according to our ideals and values. We cannot confuse our ideas, our attitudes, and our motives with theirs. And to understand what sustained the Inquisitions, we need a prerequisite, and that prerequisite is a change of mindset. We have to adopt and understand certain values and cast out certain values which we maintain. And one of those things which we have to dismiss from our thinking immediately is the concept of toleration. Tolerance is not a natural condition of society. Tolerance now in the late 20th century is considered a supreme virtue in liberal Western society, in which we believe in the equality of all men, all races, genders, ideas, ideals, and religions. Intolerance, or the espousal of inequality, is the only politically incorrect sin nowadays. But can you imagine a medieval priest, rabbi, or imam with such an attitude? That would be tantamount to heresy and blasphemy. To listen to somebody say that all ideas and all religions are valid leads one to the philosophical dead end, of course, that none of them are valid. Because if you maintain different truths, which are contradictory, they all can be wrong, but they all can't be right. And that is the mindset of the medieval thinker, whether he be Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. Or as Sir Edward Gibbon, the author of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, put it more poetically, when discussing the medieval Muslim philosopher Averroes, he said, Averroes has been accused of despising the religion of the Jews, Christians, and Mohammedans. Each of these sects would agree that in 2 instances out of the 3, his contempt was perfectly reasonable. And that's the attitude we have to adopt, that there is only one way and one truth in the medieval mindset. But, one may say, and object, what about the much lauded periods when the 3 faiths lived together peacefully and harmoniously, like, for instance, in Norman Sicily or medieval Spain, when Jews, Christians, both Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox, and Muslims got along famously together? Well, if you took the course on Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, you remember that those instances of tolerance were few and far between. It was usually a matter of necessity on the part of the ruler of the time. And what we tout as a period of tolerance, many of the contemporaries derided as a period of decadence. And in any case, when the faiths did get along with one another, those periods were of very short duration, and they were usually followed by horrific purges of the people of the faiths not in possession of political and economic power. So we have to basically set aside this idea that man is a tolerant creature. We also have to adopt a new idea that was most prevalent in the Middle Ages, and that is the immortality of the soul, salvation, damnation, and the power of the heretic. Now, the immortality of the soul was not just a philosophic concept in medieval times. It was a core, fundamental belief that each and every one of us had a soul that was destined for either eternal salvation or damnation. And heretics could bring down God's wrath on society at large and on all men's souls in particular. Heresy was likened to a physical contagion, like the plague. But it was worse than the plague, because the plague only brought death. A heretic and heresy brought death and damnation, which was much worse than simply expiring from this world. A medieval German writer wrote, "Had I a sister in a country wherein there was but one single heretic, still that one single heretic would keep me in fear of her." Heresy was an all-encompassing, contagious evil. As we'll see, oftentimes when the inquisitors were trying to ascertain whether the accused was guilty of heresy or not, the crowds of the city simply would burst into the jail, seize the heretic, lynch the heretic, or burn the heretic. Why? They feared for their crops, their homes, and their immortal souls. They believed that a heretic and heresy would ruin any society that harbored the heretic or heresy. So we have to understand, but not necessarily agree with, that it was this fear of contagion from heretics that gave birth to and sustained the Inquisitions. Now, we may sanctimoniously describe this attitude as primitive, barbaric, simple-minded, or we could use a plethora of adjectives that indicate our disapproval and our smug sense of superiority to this attitude. But we must understand that this fear of contagion was real, it was universal, and for the times it was absolutely normal. It was not an aberration, it was not an unexplained piece of freakish behavior, nor was it a sinister piece of propaganda devised by evil Roman Catholic churchmen and fopped off on an unsuspecting laity to get them to acquiesce and aid in an evil undertaking. We often romantically equate the heretic of the Middle Ages with the free thinker of Walden Pond. That's not the position the heretic had in the Middle Ages. The position the heretic had in the Middle Ages is synonymous with the position in our society that a drug dealer, a pornographer, or a racist has. That's the status of the heretic in the Middle Ages.